Kabbalistic idea of lighting candles when you daven, when you learn, so that you're surrounded by light, because the Torah is considered to be fire, white fire on black fire, says the Gemara. The black fire are the letters, and the white fire are the spaces between them, and both have meaning. That's another Kabbalistic concept, which is a beautiful idea. Okay. Hello to the Luries there. Yes, I saw you. Good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. And thank you for joining. All right. Well, I want to say that I would like to dedicate this year in memory of a very, very unique person who passed away yesterday, Howard Chaim Kleinberg of Toronto. He was a survivor of the Holocaust and has an amazing story. His wife actually, before they were married, right after the Holocaust, after the liberation, she basically nursed him back to health, and they separated. She went her way back to her family to find her family. He went to her to find his, and they eventually found each other. And they were actually featured on the Regis and Kathy show. And it's quite an amazing story. And they were highlighted in, I guess it was maybe Valentine's Day. I don't remember the occasion. And very wonderful person. And I want to just say this here really in his memory, Howard or Chaim Kleinberg, so from Toronto. Well, tonight we're going to discuss in honor of Chanuka, the subject, the curious correlation between Yosef and Chanuka. Now, when you first hear about this, one's first reaction is that makes no sense at all. What would Yosef have to do with Chanuka? He is obviously living many, many centuries before the Chanuka story. So how could he really have any connection to Chanuka? The Torah hasn't been given, and Chanuka is a chag that only comes about well after the Torah, right? In the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. However, when we think about it, something seems to kind of mystically tell us that there must be a connection, because the story of Yosef is always read at Chanuka time. Either this week's Parsha Vayeshev or next week's Parsha of Miketz, always read during Chanuka. So we are telling the story of Yosef while we are celebrating Chanuka. So did that just come about coincidentally, or was that meant to be? And then maybe to add a little bit to this mystery, you know that most of the Jewish holidays have a Talmudic source or Masechta, a book of the Gemara devoted to that holiday. Yom Kippur has Yuma, and Sukkot has Sukkah, Rosh Hashanah has Rosh Hashanah, Pesach has Pesachim, even Purim has Megillah. Chanuka, however, does not have its own Gemara. It is found in a very limited way within the Gemara of Shabbat. And there on Daf Chaf Bet of Shabbat, when we're talking about the lighting of Shabbat candles and various laws of Shabbat, suddenly, as we would say in French, in the Mitten Derinim, all of a sudden, we refer back to a pasuk in the Torah about Yosef. The pasuk that says, "V'habor reik ein bo mayim," that he was thrown into a pit, there was no water. And the Gemara says, okay, it says it was empty. So what are you adding by telling us there was no water? If it's empty, it's empty. And if there's water, it's not empty. So the Gemara answers that Maim ein bo, aval nechashim ve'akravim yesh. But there were snakes and there were scorpions in that pit. And then that's it. Then the Gemara goes on to continue talking about Shabbat. Why did all of a sudden did we introduce in this discussion about Chanuka in Gemara Shabbat, exactly in the place where we ask the question, my Chanuka, what is Chanuka all about? And then right afterwards, we tell a story about what happened in the case of Yosef, him being thrown into this pit by his brothers. So clearly, I think the rabbi is trying to tell us that there must be some connection. And that's what I want to investigate this mystery tonight. And to do that, I'm going to take you on a journey that Yosef conducts, upon which Yosef travels in really two directions, or in really two ways. The journey of Yosef is fascinating. And part one is Yosef's journey from boy to man, to maturity, from someone who is clearly a young teenager. He's 17 years old when this whole story begins. And he's going to undergo a tremendous transformation. He begins as a very vain, conceited, arrogant young man. We're told that he had black curly hair. He would spend lots of time in front of the mirror, primping himself and making himself look even more handsome than he was. And he had these classic good looks. When Yaakov gives his bracha at the end of Parshat Vayeshev to all of the tribes, to all of his children, he says about Yosef, Bein Porat Yosef Alei Ayin, he is a charming young man, so good looking, Banot Tzada Alei Shur, that the girls climb up onto the wall to a high place to get a glimpse of him, so they can see him even from afar. So good looking is he. And he knows that. He's very full of himself. We know, of course, that he has these dreams, and the dreams portray him as essentially master over his family, over his brothers, even over his father and parents. The dream most vividly about the sun and the moon and the 12 stars that bow down to him. He doesn't just dream it. He makes sure to tell his family the dreams he has. He's very confident. He has a coat of many colors, which is something that resembles a royal robe that his father gave him. And he feels like he's royalty. And he goes so far as to inform on his brothers. And as a result of that, of course, he creates this tremendous dissonance and even hatred. It says there about the brothers, V'lo yachlu dabru l'shalom. We have this idea that when you part company with someone, you say, lech l'shalom. Not bishalom, but l'shalom. And the Vilna Gaon comments, there was such animosity between the brothers, they couldn't even wish him well and say to him, l'shalom, go in peace. This is Yosef's character when we meet him as a 17-year-old, a teenager, and clearly immature. But he's going to go on a journey where he will mature to the point where this arrogant teenager will become known as Yosef Hatzadik. Other than Noach, who is explicitly called a tzaddik in the Torah, Yosef's the only other person in the Chumash that has this title or will gain this title of a tzaddik. It's very, very unusual. How does he get there? What steps does he take along the way? Well, first of all, when he goes to look for his brothers who are pasturing the sheep, he makes the statement to a kind of mysterious character and says, Et achai anochi mevakesh. I'm seeking my brothers. He's already understanding, I've got to somehow reconcile, but unfortunately it's too late. And the brothers take him. They have a whole discussion. Should they kill him? Is he a bad seed? You know, they perhaps understood that in every generation there seems to be a bad seed. Ishmael is opposed to Yitzchak, and Esav is opposed to Yaakov, and now maybe it's Yosef. And ultimately, they throw him in the pit, and then he is sold numerous times till he comes to Egypt. And there begins his transformation. Step number one is he is thrown into this pit, which is really just a hole in the ground. It's not like your, country club prison with, cable TV and ping pong court, tennis courts and ping pong tables. And he sees that there are two people there that clearly are distraught. Now, if any of us were thrown into a jail, especially in a foreign country, we probably would avoid the people that are found in that jail. But he doesn't do that. He goes up to these people, and let me just, very quickly, just to read you about what happens in there and how he takes the time to speak to these two individuals. We'll call them the butler and the baker. And he says to them, I see that by your face that you're despondent. What's wrong? Why are you so upset? And quite amazingly, this young lad befriends them, and that begins the process of his transformation and the process of redemption. Because as we know the story, they're going to tell him that they had these dreams and ask him to interpret. He does so. And of course, eventually, that's going to help him come before Pharaoh and to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. Caring about somebody else beyond yourself is the first step of maturity and becoming someone who has a high moral standing. Step number two comes when he's in the house of Potiphar. And as we said before, he's very good looking. Potiphar's wife, we don't know her name. We call her Mrs. Potiphar. She's very enamored with Yosef. She has an obsession with him day in and day out. She tries to seduce him. There's all kinds of reasons about this without getting into that any deeper. And he resists her up to a point where he is willing, he's just been beaten down by her. And he decides that, well, maybe I will give in to her. And then at the last moment, he changes his mind. The Medrash says he sees a vision of his father. Perhaps he's looking in a mirror or in the water and he sees himself because he looks very much like Yaakov. We say, Ela told those Yaakov Yosef. They look very much alike, perhaps. But perhaps he also understands that his father also went through a lot of trials and tribulations and had to hold his faith, and he decides as well. And as a result of that, he is accused of rape by Mrs. Potiphar, and we see his fortune start to lag, but he remains resolute. And then he comes before Pharaoh when the butler, having been restored to his post, remembers that Yosef is the interpreter of dreams, and Pharaoh has these dreams that no one can interpret. And so they call Yosef out of prison, and after 13 years, and he comes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh relates his dreams, and he knows almost immediately that Yosef has given a true interpretation. But here too, we see Yosef's maturity. He does not take credit for interpreting those dreams. Instead, he gives full and total credit to God. And he says to to Paro, he says, Bil Adai, Elokim Yaneh et Shlom Paro. It's not me, it's God who is interpreting or giving me the Ruach HaKodesh, the inspiration to tell you what the dreams mean. And he refuses to take any credit. He will use the name of God 5 times in his discussion with Paro to bring home the point that he's not taking any credit. This is not the arrogant teenager anymore who wants to have all the glory. Instead, it's quite the opposite. He's humble and he says, I'm not the one to thank. It's God. Ultimately, Yosef will demonstrate tremendous Mesirat Nefesh, self-sacrifice. He will bring the family to Egypt. He will support his entire family. He forgives his brothers as well for what they did to him, which is another sign of tremendous maturity and tremendous moral standing, to say that I don't hold you accountable. And the pasuk says, it's a beautiful pasuk. He says, "Va'ata lo atem shalachtem oti hena." You didn't send me to Egypt. You didn't cause me to come here. Ki Elokim. It was God. Vayisimeni la'av l'paro ladon l'kol beito. All these things that happened, it happened for a reason. I don't blame you. Here too, we're seeing this very, very different Yosef. And ultimately, as perhaps the bottom line on his sense of self-sacrifice, he will be the first. He's one of the youngest of Yaakov's children, but he will be the first to die. And in a sense, he will do everything that needs to be done to set the stage for the Jewish people to come to Egypt, to be placed in Goshen, and to prepare both for the slavery and ultimately for the redemption, and then he will die. That's part one of his journey, the journey of maturity. But there is another journey he has to take. And that is not just his own personal character, but his relationship with his family and his people, his connection to Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. Yosef becomes viceroy, and he's in a position of power, but he never looks for his family. When he is in prison, there's nothing he can do. But when he, again, there's all kinds of commentaries on this, but when he becomes viceroy, why doesn't he look for his parents, for his family? Some want to say that he tried to look, but they were nomadic and he couldn't find them. But I think that the real, almost obvious, simple reason is he didn't look for his family because he didn't want to find his family. He wanted nothing to do with them. They threw me in a pit. Even my father, he could have perhaps prevented this from happening, and he didn't. And I really want nothing to do with them. He names his first child Menashe. The pasuk says, "Vayikra shema b'chor Menashe, ki nashani Elokim et kol amali ve'et kol beit avi." Nashani, Menashe, from the word to forget, because God has caused me or allowed me to forget all of my troubles and the house of my father. He wants to forget about that past. It's been so traumatic for him. And he's changing. He's given an Egyptian wife. He's given a new name, the name Tzafnat Paneach, which essentially means the hidden face. Tzafon, Tzafun means hidden, paneach from the word panim. He looks different. He's not the same Yosef. His brothers come to Egypt, and the pasuk says Yosef recognized them, but they didn't recognize him because he talked like an Egyptian, and it wasn't that long. Okay, it was 17 years since they saw him, but they don't recognize him. He's a different person. And he's quite content to be in a position of power in Egypt. But here too, he has to change. And little by little, he comes to realize this is not where I need to be. This is not who I am. Perhaps it comes when he sees when the brothers come and they're ushered into the palace, and the pasuk tells us that when they sit down to eat, that the Egyptians make sure that they eat in separate rooms. Says the pasuk, "V'lamitzrim haochlim ito levadam ki lo yuchluna mitzrim lechol et ivrim lechem." They cannot break bread with the Hebrews, ki to'avahi lemitzrayim, because that's an abomination. An Egyptian does not share a meal with Jews. They're second, third, fourth class. Even before the slavery, Yosef, of course, they don't know who Yosef is, but he's already feeling, maybe this isn't the panacea that I thought it was. When he has his second child, and we're not sure exactly when that is, but he names his second child Ephraim. And the pasuk says, let me find it. Hold on a second. Et Shema Sheni Kara Ephraim ki hifrani Elokim be'eretz anyi. He says, God has made me fruitful or successful in the land of my affliction. Now suddenly he refers to Egypt not in glowing terms, but as a land of affliction. And when the brothers come and are going to meet Paro, Yosef gives them advice. He says to them, tell Paro and tell the Egyptians that you are shepherds. Don't tell them that you have any other occupation. They were by and large farmers. Why does he say that? He says that ki anshe miknehayu, tell them that you are cattlemen. Why? Ki toavat mitzrayim kol ro'et zon. Again, this word, because shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. And therefore, they will not want you near them. They'll want to keep you separate. And I want you to be separate, says Yosef, because you don't need to be too close to this depraved people. Let them put you in a suburb, a cushy suburb of Goshen, where you will have very little contact with them and will not be exposed to their immorality and depravity. And ultimately, he makes them swear that when they leave Egypt, and they will, that they are to take his bones with them when they go. And although he may be on the level of a king, this is not his country. This is not where he wants to end up. And he tells them in a kind of prophecy, you will not stay here forever in Egypt. You think that it's a cushy and just a totally comfortable existence, but it's not. You will leave and you take me with you when you go. Yosef has really come around, and he has come to realize that his lot belongs with the Jewish people and not with Egypt. And he is a completely transformed person, both on a personal level in terms of his maturity and his character, but also in terms of his realization that at the end of the day, we have to stay together. We have to combine our forces in order to survive and to create our own destiny. And this, in effect, is the story of Chanuka. And that's the connection, because what is Chanuka? My Chanuka, it's not just about that one cruse of oil. The story of Chanuka is the struggle to stay united and to have a pure, undiluted Judaism. The first battle of Chanuka is not fought against the Syrian Greeks. It's a civil war, Maccabee versus Hellenist, in order to weed out and to drive out any of these foreign elements and alien culture from Israel. Matityahu sees a Jew bringing a pig as an offering to an idol, and he kills him. And that begins the battle. Before we face the Antiochus and Syrian Greeks, we first have to get our own act together in order to understand that we have our own unique culture and our own special way of life. That, yes, we are a part of the world, but we also are apart from the world. And this is the lesson that Yosef learned, that at the end of the day, he has to reunite with his people. And the Maccabees fought, first and foremost, for us to grasp the unique nature of our own culture, and then we could reject a foreign culture being imposed upon us. The symbol of Hanukkah, of course, is the menorah or Chanukiah, which is, of course, based on the menorah. And that's exactly the point it tries to make. It's a symbol that says to us that by its many branches, but one base, we are different in many ways. We are Sephardim, we are Ashkenazim, we are observant, we are non-observant. We come from perhaps different backgrounds, but we come from one base. We have a commonality that from which stems everything else. And that is exactly what Hanukkah is teaching us. The jar of oil that was untainted, that was pure, the ability of those who remain faithful to our culture and our tradition and our Torah, able to take that one jar and make it last and defeat the enemy, no matter how outnumbered we may be. It's all really part of the same story. And the saga of Yosef and Chanuka, I suggest they merge with that one central message, that our destiny is composed of Am Yisrael, Im Torat Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael. So Yosef has to go through that struggle. He has to battle his own galut experience to go from the pit, from the prison, to the highest realms of power, and yet to understand that unless I am with my people, with my family, and unless I am in my own land, then I really have nothing at all. That's the message of Yosef. That's the message of Hanukkah, and the ability to rededicate ourselves to that principle, to drive away the foreign culture, to unite with one another, is what Yosef and Hanukkah are both all about. So it's not by coincidence that these two stories come together, because they're both sending us the same message. And that message is one that is so appropriate for Hanukkah, because it's the holiday that comes in dark times. It comes in the winter, far from other holidays, representing our descent or our entrance into sometimes dark times. And we have to have that light, the light of the menorah, but also the Chanuka, but also the light that tells us that if we stay faithful to who we are and to where we come from and where we are going, we will emerge from the darkness always into light. Chanuka Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and I thank all of you for joining tonight, because I know it's a busy time for everybody, and I hope it will be a special zchut for you to have learned Torah during the time that the candles are burning, or will burn if you're coming from from outside of Israel, and that you'll have light in your homes, and it'll be a beautiful week of Hanukkah for everybody.
Thank you. Hanukkah.
Very nice.